I woke up with my swollen face pressed against rough wooden boards. A note was stapled to my coat. Not even worth feeding. The cold bit through my thin clothes as I tried to remember how I ended up on this stranger porch. The early morning light cast long shadows across the weathered boards. My head throbbed, and the taste of blood lingered in my mouth. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes clinked softly against the persistent mountain breeze. I couldn't move without pain shooting through my ribs. I heard heavy footsteps inside the house, then the creak of a door that hadn't been oiled in years. Jesus Christ. His voice was gruff, like sandpaper on stone. I flinched, curling tighter against myself, making my body as small as possible. A reflex from years of practice. "Don't move," he said, and disappeared back inside. The porch smelled of pine and cigarettes. Frost had formed delicate patterns on the wooden railing overnight. I tried to sit up, but my muscles screamed in protest. How long had I been lying here? Hours? All night? The man returned with a blanket, army green, worn at the edges. He approached slowly, like you would a wounded animal. When he reached for the note pinned to my coat, I jerked away. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice softer now. "Need to get this off you." He was older, maybe 60, with a face mapped by deep lines and a beard streaked with grey. His eyes, though, pale blue and sharp, seemed to see right through me. His left sleeve hung empty, pinned neatly at the shoulder. I let him remove the note, watching as he read it, his jaw tightening. Without a word, he crumpled it in his fist. "Can you stand?" he asked. I tried, failed, then tried again with his help. The world tilted dangerously, but his grip was steady. As he guided me inside, I caught a glimpse of the small house behind him, a simple cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, set back from a narrow mountain road. No other houses in sight. "Name S. Frank," he said, helping me to a worn leather couch. "This is Pine Creek." Population barely enough to matter. Pine Creek. The name meant nothing to me. "You got a name?" he asked, draping the blanket over my shoulders. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat felt raw, unused. Had I screamed, cried? I couldn't remember. "That's all right," Frank said, moving toward a small kitchen. "It'll come back." The cabin was sparse but clean. A wood stove in one corner gave off steady heat. The walls were mostly bare except for a folded American flag in a triangular case and a few faded photographs. A single window faced the forested hills beyond. Frank returned with a mug of something hot. "It is just tea," he said, placing it on the coffee table in front of me. "When you ready." My hands shook as I reached for it. The warmth spread through my fingers, a small mercy. "I should call the sheriff," Frank said, more to himself than to me. But Hank S., about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. I must have looked panicked because he quickly added, "Not right away, when you're ready to talk." The tea was sweet, with a hint of something like cinnamon. I took small sips, feeling life slowly return to my frozen limbs. Frank sat in a chair across from me, not too close, giving me space. He didn't stare or ask questions. He just waited. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. A crow called from somewhere in the trees. Normal sounds, safe sounds, but every creak of the house made me tense. "Whoever did this," Frank finally said, nodding toward my face, which I knew must be bruised. "They won to find you here." I didn't know why I believed him. Maybe it was the way he said it, like a simple fact, not a promise that could be broken. Or maybe I just had nowhere else to go. "Let me get you something for those cuts," he said, pushing himself up from the chair with a wince I recognized, the kind that comes from old wounds that never quite heal. As he disappeared down a short hallway, I caught sight of myself in a small mirror on the wall. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, dirty blonde hair matted with blood, one eye swollen shut, split lip, a stranger with my face. Frank returned with a first aid kit, setting it on the coffee table. Military grade, he said with a hint of pride. Better than that drugstore junk. He cleaned the cuts on my face with gentle, practiced movements. The antiseptics stung, but I didn't flinch. Pain was an old friend. Nothing needs stitches, he said. But you were going to have some impressive bruises for a while. When he finished, he packed up the kit and took my empty mug. Bathroom OS down the hall if you need it. Got some clothes that might fit you in the chest by the bed. My daughter S, from a long time ago. He said it casually, but something in his voice caught. The daughter was a wound, I could tell. One of many, probably. I'll be outside, Frank continued. Take your time. Door locks from the inside. And after he left, I sat still for a long while, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling around me. The steady tick of a clock, the soft pop from the wood stove. Normal sounds from a normal life, foreign to me. Eventually, I made my way down the hallway, my legs unsteady beneath me. The bathroom was small but clean, with a shower that looked like it had been installed decades ago. I caught my reflection again in the mirror above the sink. The stranger East's eyes looked back at me, hollow, frightened, but alive. I splashed cold water on my face, careful of the cuts. The shock of it brought back flashes of memory. A car door slamming, gravel under my knees, someone's voice hissing in my ear. Worthless. Not even worth feeding. I gripped the edge of the sink until the memory faded. In the bedroom, I found the chest Frank had mentioned. Inside were neatly folded women's clothes, jeans, flannel shirts, sweaters. They smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I selected the least personal items I could find, a grey sweatshirt and jeans, and changed out of my filthy clothes. The sweatshirt was soft from many washings, the jeans a little loose but wearable. I folded my old clothes into a tight bundle, unsure what to do with them. Burn them, maybe. Through the bedroom window, I could see Frank outside, splitting wood with practiced swings of an axe. His empty sleeve was pinned back, but he moved with the confidence of someone who had long ago adapted to his loss. Each log split cleanly, the sound echoing against the hills. I sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The sheets were clean, the blanket heavy and warm. I told myself I would rest for just a minute, gather my strength. When I woke, the room was dark except for a thin strip of light coming from under the door. I'd slept the day away. My body ached, but my head was clearer. I made my way back to the living room, where Frank sat in his chair, reading by lamplight. He looked up when I entered, but didn't seem surprised. "Hungry?" he asked, marking his place in the book. I nodded, finding my voice at last. "Yes." It came out as a croak. "Good," Frank said, rising. I made stew. The kitchen was small but functional. A pot simmered on the stove, filling the air with the rich smell of beef and vegetables. Frank ladled a generous portion into a bowl and placed it on the table. "Sit," he said. "Eat." I sat, picking up the spoon with still trembling fingers. The first bite nearly made me cry. Warm, savory, real food. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten. Frank sat across from me with his own bowl, watching me with those sharp blue eyes. "You have a name you want to tell me?" he asked after a while. I swallowed, the stew suddenly thick in my throat. "Sarah," I said. It wasn't my real name, but it would do for now. Frank nodded, accepting this without question. "Sarah, good name." We ate in silence after that, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the occasional pop from the wood stove in the next room. Through the kitchen window, I could see nothing but darkness and the faint reflection of the room behind me. "Where am I?" I finally asked. "Pine Creek, Montana," Frank answered. "Nearest real town is 40 miles that way." He gestured vaguely eastward. "How did I get here?" Frank set down his spoon. "Hoping you could tell me that. Found you this morning, out cold on my porch. No car, no tracks in the snow, except some that led from the road." Snow. I hadn't noticed it before, but now I could see the white dusting on the windowsill outside. Early winter in Montana. "Someone dropped you here," Frank continued. Left you with that note. Why you? Boom. The question slipped out before I could stop it. Frank's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Good question. I'm not exactly the welcoming committee around here. He took a sip of water. Most folks in town avoid this place. The crazy one-armed vet who lives in the woods. I looked down at my half-empty bowl. I'm sorry. I'll leave as soon as… No. His voice was firm, but not harsh. You will stay until you re-healed, until you have got somewhere safe to go. Point I should have been afraid. A strange man, an isolated cabin in the woods. But something about Frank, the careful way he cleaned my wounds, the space he gave me, the food he made, told me I wasn't in danger. Not from him anyway. Thank you, I whispered. Frank nodded once, then stood to clear the dishes. There is more if you want it. I did want it. I ate a second bowl while Frank washed the few dishes, his movements efficient despite having only one arm. When I finished, he showed me where the extra blankets were kept, in case I got cold in the night. I am up at dawn, he said as he headed toward his bedroom. But sleep as long as you need. Bathroom cabinet has painkillers if you need them. At the doorway he paused. Lock your door if it makes you feel better. I wouldn't blame you. After he left, I sat alone in the quiet living room. The wood stove cast a warm glow across the floor. Outside, an owl called into the night. I thought about locking my bedroom door, but decided against it. Instead, I curled up under the heavy blankets, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the cabin. For the first time in months, I fell asleep without fear. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. I opened my eyes to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar ceiling above me. The events of yesterday crashed back. Waking on the porch, Frank's kindness, the note, not even worth feeding. My body protested as I sat up, every muscle stiff and sore. In the daylight, I could see bruises on my arms, varying shades of purple and yellow. Old and new marks telling a story I wasn't ready to share. I found my way to the bathroom, where the mirror confirmed what I already knew. My face was a mess of bruises. The swelling around my eye had gone down enough that I could open it partially, but the colors had deepened to a dark purple. My split lip looked angry and red. After washing up, I followed the smell of breakfast to the kitchen. Frank stood at the stove, his back to me. He wore a flannel shirt with the left sleeve neatly pinned, jeans worn soft at the knees, and heavy work boots. A man ready for a day of physical labor. Morning, he said without turning around. Coffee's ready if you want some. I poured myself a cup, wrapping my hands around its warmth. Through the kitchen window, I could see the world outside clearly for the first time. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. A dirt road wound away toward what I assumed was the town. A light dusting of snow covered everything, making the world look clean and new. Sleep okay? Frank asked, placing a plate of eggs and bacon on the table. I nodded, taking a seat. Better than I have in a while. Frank sat across from me with his own plate. Up close, in the morning light, I could see the details I'd missed yesterday. A scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, the slight tremor in his right hand. The way his eyes constantly scanned the room, the window, the door. Old habits from a soldier who'd seen combat. Got some errands in town, he said between bites. Need anything? I shook my head, then reconsidered. Maybe toothbrush? Soap? Already on the list, Frank said with a nod. Anything else? Clothes? I looked down at the borrowed outfit I was still wearing. I can pay you back. Not yet. Didn't ask for payment, Frank said simply. We ate in silence for a while. The bacon was crisp, the eggs perfectly cooked. Simple food made with care. The town, I finally asked. Pine Creek. What is it like? Frank considered this as he sipped his coffee. Small, dying, really. Used to be a mining town, then a logging town. Now it's just hanging on. One general store, post office, bar, church, handful of houses, people who can leave or one tea. Do you know everyone there? Frank's eyes met mine, understanding the real question. Yes, and they know me. Not that we talk much. Relief washed through me. If Frank knew everyone, he'd know if someone came looking for me. I'll be back by noon, he said, rising from the table. Rest, heal, make yourself at home. After he left, I explored the cabin properly. 2 bedrooms, the bathroom, the kitchen, and the living room with its wood stove. Everything was neat, organized, and surprisingly clean for a man living alone. Military precision, I guessed. The photos I'd noticed yesterday were mostly landscapes. Mountains, forests, places without people. But one, in a simple frame on a bookshelf, showed a younger Frank in uniform, his left arm still intact, standing beside a pretty woman with blonde hair and a small girl who couldn't have been more than 5. I didn't touch it. Some memories are too precious, too painful to disturb. The bookshelves were filled with practical manuals, home repair, gardening, wilderness survival, mixed with dog-eared paperbacks. Louis L. Amour westerns, some Hemingway, a few thrillers. I pulled one out and settled on the couch, but the words swam before my eyes, refusing to form meaning. Instead, I found myself staring out the window, watching snowflakes begin to fall again, soft and lazy in the late morning light. My mind kept returning to the note, to the porch, to the gaps in my memory. Who had brought me here? Why Frank's cabin? Why not the hospital or police station if someone wanted to help me? The questions circled without answers. I must have dozed off because the sound of a truck pulling up startled me awake. Through the window, I saw Frank's old Ford pickup, its dark green paint almost black against the snow. He climbed out, carrying 2 paper bags from the general store. I met him at the door, taking one of the bags while he stomped snow from his boots. Weather's turning, he said by way of greeting. Might get snowed in for a day or 2. The thought should have frightened me, trapped in a remote cabin with a stranger, but instead I felt a surprising calm. Snow meant isolation, yes, but also protection. A barrier between me and whatever had led to me being dumped on Frank's porch. We unpacked the groceries together, moving around the small kitchen in an awkward dance as we found places for everything. Frank had bought the basics: milk, bread, eggs, canned goods, along with the toiletries I'd asked for and a few extras. A soft hairbrush, a package of women's underwear still with the tags on, pain relievers, antiseptic cream, things he thought I might need, but had been too proud or embarrassed to ask for. Thank you, I said, holding the hairbrush like it was something precious. Such a simple thing, but it represented normalcy, dignity. Frank nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. Got something else for you? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small flip phone. It's prepaid. Nothing fancy, but it works out here mostly. I took it, surprised by the gesture. Thank you, but no internet, Frank said, anticipating my concern. Just calls and texts, no GPS, no way to track it. He paused. My number's already in there, case you need to reach me, or want me to leave you alone for a while. The consideration behind the gift left me speechless. He'd thought not just about my safety, but my need for space, for control. People in town asking questions, I finally managed to ask. Frank hung his coat by the door. Mary at the store wanted to know if I was entertaining company. Told her my niece was visiting for a while. He glanced at me. Hope that is okay, easier than the truth. I nodded, relieved at the simple cover story. Your niece from where? Idaho, Frank said. Far enough that nobody here would know different, close enough to be believable. The snow was falling more heavily now, thick flakes that quickly covered Frank's truck outside. He moved to the wood stove, adding another log from the stack beside it. You hungry? He asked. I was, I realized. Properly hungry for the first time in days. I could eat. Good, Frank said. Because I make a decent beef stew, but that about it. Hope you know how to cook. The corner of my mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile, but close. I can cook. We worked side by side in the small kitchen, me chopping vegetables while Frank prepared the chicken he de-bought. The domesticity of it was surreal after everything that had happened, but also grounding. Chop an onion, mince garlic, slice carrots. Simple tasks with clear beginnings and ends. You were in the military, I said, not a question. Frank nodded, his knife moving rhythmically through a potato. Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't tee. I didn't press. We all have stories we were not ready to tell. The arm? I finally asked. IED, he said simply. 10 years ago now. 10 years. A decade of adapting, of learning to live differently. I wondered if that S what waited for me. Years of rebuilding from whatever had broken me. You were good at this, I said, gesturing to the chicken he was expertly deboning with one hand. Necessity, Frank replied. You adapt, or you don to eat. By the time dinner was ready, the snow outside had become a full-blown storm. Wind howled around the eaves of the cabin, but inside it was warm and filled with the smell of roasting chicken and herbs. We ate at the small kitchen table, watching the snow through the window. Neither of us felt the need to fill the silence with small talk. There was comfort in the quiet, in the simple act of sharing a meal without expectations. After dinner, Frank built up the fire in the wood stove while I washed dishes. My reflection in the dark kitchen window was ghostly, a thin face with bruised eyes, hollow cheeks. But beneath the injuries was something else, something I hadn't seen in a long time. A spark, the tiniest hint of hope. How long can I stay? I asked later, as Frank checked the locks on the doors and windows. Another habit I recognized from my own past. Always secure the perimeter. Always know your exits. Frank paused, his hand on the front door deadbolt. As long as you need. Why are you helping me? The question had been burning inside me all day. Frank was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. When I came back from Iraq, he said, I wasn't to right. Head wasn't to right. Arm was gone. Wife was gone. Couldn't hold a job. Ended up living in my truck for almost a year. He turned from the door to face me. One night, middle of winter, ran out of gas outside this town. Would have frozen to death if an old farmer hadn't found me. Let me stay in his barn till I got back on my feet. He looked out the window at the swirling snow. Never got to thank him properly. He died before I could. Figure this is my chance to pass it on. The simple honesty of his answer brought tears to my eyes. I blinked them back, unwilling to give in to the emotion building in my chest. Get some rest, Frank said, turning toward his bedroom. Storm should pass by morning. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind moan through the trees, thoughts churning like the snow outside. Frank's story echoed in my mind. The cycle of kindness, one person helping another in their darkest moment. I wondered if someday I might be strong enough to do the same for someone else. For the first time since I'd awoken on Frank's porch, I allowed myself to believe I might have a future beyond survival, that this shelter, physical and emotional, might be the beginning of something else, something like healing. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, I was safe. And for now, that was enough. This first part introduces Sarah, using a false name, and Frank, establishing their initial dynamic and the mysterious circumstances that brought her to his doorstep. I've created a rich sensory environment in a small Montana town, focusing on themes of dignity, protection, and the beginnings of healing. Now I'll continue with the second part of the story, which will deepen the characters' backgrounds and emotional journey. Days passed, then a week. The rhythm of life in Frank's cabin became familiar. Coffee at dawn, simple meals, quiet evenings by the wood stove. My bruises faded from purple to yellow to a sickly green. The split in my lip healed, leaving only a small scar. Physically, I was mending. Inside was a different story. The nightmares came almost every night. I'd awake gasping, sheets twisted around me, the echo of my own screams in my ears. Sometimes Frank would be there, a solid presence in the doorway, not coming closer, but not leaving either. "You were safe," he'd say, just those 2 words. Then he'd retreat to the kitchen, and I'd hear the quiet clink of a mug, the soft whistle of the kettle. An invitation, not a demand. Some nights I'd join him for tea. Others I'd stay curled in bed, shaking, until dawn broke through the curtains. Frank never pushed, never pried. But I could feel the questions building between us, gaining weight with each passing day. It snowed again, heavy enough that the dirt road to town disappeared completely. Frank spent those days chopping more wood, checking the generator, making sure we had enough supplies. I found comfort in the practical tasks he assigned me. Inventory the pantry, mend a tear in the living room curtains, sort through a box of mismatched gloves to find pairs. On the 10th day, as we sat by the wood stove after dinner, Frank finally asked, "Who hurt you, Sarah?" I stared into the flames, watching them dance behind the glass door of the stove. The false name D called me, Sarah, felt like a shield, one I wasn't ready to put down. "Does it matter?" I finally said. Frank was silent for a long moment. "Matters if they were looking for you." The thought sent a chill through me, despite the heat from the stove. Were they looking? Had they meant to kill me, not just abandon me? Or was I truly what the note said? Not worth the effort, not even worth feeding. "I don't think they are," I said honestly. "I think they are done with me." Frank nodded, accepting this without pushing further. He reached for his book, another Louis L.A. Amour Western, but paused before opening it. "My wife's name was Caroline," he said, his voice rough around the edges. "Died 6 years ago. Cancer." The unexpected confidence caught me off guard. This was the first personal detail Frank had shared since telling me about living in his truck. "I'm sorry," I said, inadequate but sincere. "Our daughter, Lily, hasn't spoken to me since the funeral." Frank opened his book, eyes fixed on the pages, though I doubted he was reading. "Blames me for not being there when Caroline got sick. She's right to." I waited, sensing there was more. "I was overseas when they found the tumor," Frank continued. "By the time I got back, it was already in her bones. 9 months later, she was gone." He turned a page. "The clothes you wearing are hers. Lily didn't want them." The revelation made the soft flannel shirt I wore feel suddenly heavier. I was wearing a dead woman or clothes, sleeping in her bed, sitting in her home. "I can find something else," I started. "No," Frank cut in. "Caroline would have liked that they were being used, that they were helping someone." We sat in silence after that, the only sounds the crack of the fire and the occasional turn of a page. I watched Frank's face in the warm light, the deep lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the grey in his beard. A face weathered by loss, by regret, by years of solitude. Eventually, I spoke. "My real name is Emma." Frank looked up from his book, his blue eyes sharp. "Emma," he repeated, testing the name. "Suits you better than Sarah." And just like that, I'd given him a piece of myself, small but real. The first stepping stone across a wide river. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Frank announced he needed to go into town for supplies. We were running low on milk and bread, and he needed medication from the VA clinic that operated part-time in Pine Creek. "Want to come?" he asked as he pulled on his heavy coat. "Might do you good to get out." The thought of leaving the safety of the cabin made my stomach twist. But after nearly 2 weeks inside, I was beginning to feel like a ghost haunting someone else's home. "Okay," I said before I could change my mind. Frank's truck was cold, the heater struggling against the winter air. I huddled in the passenger seat, Caroline S. heavy wool coat wrapped tightly around me, a knit hat pulled low over my still discolored face. The road into town was narrow, winding through dense pine forest before opening to a small valley. Pine Creek itself was exactly as Frank had described. A handful of buildings clustered around a main street, most of them looking tired and forgotten. The general store, a post office, a bar with neon beer signs in the windows, a small church with peeling white paint, and what looked like an old schoolhouse converted into the VA clinic. Frank parked in front of the general store. "Won't be long," he promised. "You can wait here if you want." I shook my head. "I'll come in." The store was warm and smelled of coffee and cinnamon. An older woman stood behind the counter, her grey hair pulled back in a neat bun. She brightened when she saw Frank. "Frank Miller, twice in 2 weeks. Must be some kind of record." Frank nodded stiffly. "Morning, Mary. Just need a few things." Mary. S. curious gaze shifted to me, standing slightly behind Frank. "And this must be your niece. Frank mentioned you were visiting." I managed a tight smile, thankful for the hat shadowing my face. "Sarah," Frank said. "Up from Idaho for a while." "Well, welcome to Pine Creek, Sarah," Mary said warmly. "Not much to see, but the people are decent, mostly," she added with a wink. I murmured a thank you, keeping my eyes down as Frank gathered what we needed. Milk, bread, coffee, a few canned goods. The store was small but surprisingly well stocked, with everything from basic groceries to hardware to a small selection of clothing and gifts. As Frank paid, the bell above the door jingled and a man walked in, stomping snow from his boots. He was roughly Frank S. age but heavier, with a florid face and a Sheriff S. badge on his coat. "Frank," he said, his tone somewhere between greeting and challenge. "Didn't expect to see you in town again so soon." Hank," Frank replied flatly. "Just getting supplies." Sheriff Hank Masson S. gaze landed on me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "This your niece Mary, S. been talking about?" Before Frank could answer, another man entered. Younger, maybe 30, with dark hair and the same badge as Hank. His eyes found me immediately, with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Deputy Wilson," Frank acknowledged with a nod. "Miller," the deputy returned coldly. The tension in the small store was suddenly thick enough to cut. Mary busied herself with Frank S. change, avoiding everyone S. eyes. "Heard you had some trouble out at your place, Frank," Sheriff Hank said casually. "Some kind of disturbance last week?" Frank S. face remained impassive. "No trouble, just my niece arriving earlier than expected." Hank S. gaze flicked between Frank and me. "Middle of the night? Wasn't he it? Mrs. Peterson said she heard a car on your road around 2 a.m. Said it was driving awful fast for those curves." Mrs. Peterson, a neighbor I hadn't known existed. "Sarah S. bus got in late," Frank said smoothly. "Friend gave her a ride from the station in Helena." Deputy Wilson took a step closer, his eyes still fixed on me. "What happened to your face, Mawam?" I froze, unable to find my voice. Frank shifted slightly, positioning himself between me and the deputy. "My car accident," he answered for me. "Up in Idaho. Why she came to stay with me for a while. Recover." Wilson West's mouth twitched. "Seems like we've been having a lot of accidents lately." "That right?" Frank West's voice had a dangerous edge. Mary cleared her throat loudly. "Your change, Frank. And I threw in some of those molasses cookies you like." Frank collected the bag and his change, nodding his thanks to Mary. "We should get going. Need to stop at the clinic before it closes." "Nice meeting you, Sarah," Sheriff Hank called as we headed for the door. "Hope you enjoy your stay in Pine Creek." Outside, the cold air felt like a slap after the warmth of the store. Frank stowed the groceries in the truck quickly, his movements sharp with tension. "What was that about?" I asked as we pulled away from the store. Frank S. hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Wilson S. bad news. Has been since high school." "And the sheriff?" "Hank S. not a bad sort, just lazy. Lets Wilson run things more than he should." Frank glanced at me. You okay?" I nodded, but the encounter had left me shaken. The way Deputy Wilson had looked at me, like he knew something, like he was looking for something, or someone. The VA clinic was our next stop, a small building with a flag out front and a handicap ramp leading to the door. "I want to be long," Frank promised, leaving me in the truck with the heater running. Through the clinic windows, I could see him talking to a woman in scrubs, probably a nurse. The conversation seemed routine, ending with her handing him a small paper bag that he tucked into his coat pocket. Prescription refilled. On our way back through town, we passed the local bar, the Rusty Nail according to the weathered sign. A few trucks were parked outside despite the early hour. One of them I recognized, Deputy Wilson S. "Does everyone in town know everyone else's business?" I asked, as we turned onto the road back to the cabin. Frank A.'s mouth quirked. "Pretty much. One of the reasons I live outside town. The other reasons? Don not much like people," Frank said simply, "and they don not much like me." I thought about the way Mary had brightened when she saw him, the warmth in her voice. "Some of them like you, just fine." Frank didn't answer, but I caught the slight softening around his eyes. Back at the cabin, as we unpacked the groceries, Frank pulled a small brown bottle from his pocket. "Got something for you," he said, placing it on the counter. "For the pain." I picked it up. Prescription strength ibuprofen. "But this is from the VA. How did you—" "Told them it was for me," Frank said, hanging up his coat. "My arm, it's been bothering me more than usual." Not exactly a lie. The small kindness nearly undid me. I turned away quickly, blinking back unexpected tears. "Thank you," I managed. Frank cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with my emotion. "Going to check the generator. Storm us coming in again tonight." That night, the promised storm arrived, lashing the cabin with wind and snow. We sat by the wood stove after dinner, the howling outside, making the warmth inside feel all the more precious. Frank was quieter than usual, his face drawn with pain he tried to hide. "Your arm?" I finally asked. He nodded, rubbing absently at his left shoulder where the sleeve ended. "Weather makes it worse. Doc calls it phantom pain. Nothing phantom about it." I thought about the bottle of pills he'd given me, keeping nothing for himself. "You should take some of those painkillers." "Had worse," he said dismissively. I recognized the stubborn set of his jaw, the same one I saw in the mirror. Pride and pain, old companions. "I am making tea," I announced, standing. "You for having some, with honey. And then you for taking something for the pain." Frank looked surprised at my firmness but didn't argue. When I returned with 2 mugs, he accepted his with a small nod of thanks. The wind rattled the windows, throwing occasional gusts of snow against the glass. In the distance, I heard the crack of a tree branch breaking under the weight of ice and snow. "What happened to your daughter?" I asked suddenly. "Lily, you said she blamed you for not being there when her mother got sick." Frank's hands tightened around his mug. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. "Lily was 17 when Caroline was diagnosed," he said finally. "I was on my 3rd tour. By the time I got emergency leave and made it home, Caroline was already in the hospital." He took a sip of tea, wincing either at the heat or the memory. Lily had been dealing with everything alone for weeks, taking her mother to chemo, cleaning up when she was sick, watching her waste away while I was on the other side of the world. The pain in his voice was raw, even after all these years. "Caroline forgave me," he continued. "Lily never has. Last I heard, she's in Seattle, married. Might have kids by now. Wouldn't know. You haven't tried to contact her?" Frank's expression hardened. "Sent letters for a while. Called on holidays. She made it clear she wanted nothing to do with me." He set his mug down. "Can't blame her. I wasn't much of a father even before Caroline got sick. Army life. Always somewhere else." I thought about the clothes in the chest, preserved like artifacts from another life. The cabin itself, maintained with military precision, but devoid of the warmth that comes from a real home. Frank had been living in a museum of his failures for years. She might feel differently now, I suggested quietly. People change. Frank's eyes met mine, suddenly sharp. Some wounds done at heal, Emma. They just get easier to carry. The use of my real name startled me. It had been so long since I'd heard it spoken aloud. I know, I whispered. We sat in silence after that, listening to the storm. Eventually, Frank stood with a wince he couldn't quite hide. Taking those pills now. You were right. After he disappeared down the hall, I remained by the fire, turning our conversation over in my mind. Some wounds done to heal. Was that true for me too? Would I always carry the scars of what had happened? What had led me to Frank's porch with that cruel note pinned to my coat? I didn't realize I was crying until a tear splashed onto my hand. Once the first fell, others followed, a dam breaking after too long holding back the flood. I cried silently, shoulders shaking with the effort to make no sound. When Frank returned, he said nothing about my tears. He simply handed me a handkerchief, clean, neatly pressed, and resumed his seat. Tell me something about you, he said after a while. Something from before. I wiped my eyes, grateful for the change of subject. Like what? Anything. What you did. Where you are from. Something good you remember. Something good. I had to search for it, pushing past the dark memories that always crowded to the front. I used to be a teacher, I said finally. Elementary school, 3rd grade. Frank nodded, as if confirming something he'd already guessed. You have that patience about you. I loved it, I continued, the memory warming me. The kids, watching them learn to read, really read, not just sound out words. Seeing that moment when something clicks. I twisted the handkerchief between my fingers. I was good at it. What happened? Frank asked gently. I stared into the fire, the flames blurring through fresh tears. I met someone. He was charming, attentive, said all the right things. My throat tightened. Classic story, right? By the time I realized who he really was, I was already isolated. Cut off. He made sure of that. Frank didn't push, just waited, giving me space to continue or stop. It started small, I said, the words coming faster now. Criticism, then anger, then more. He was careful at first, no marks where people could see. Always sorry afterward, until he wasn't as sorry anymore. The wind howled outside, echoing the storm of memories inside me. I tried to leave once, early on. He found me at my sister's house, convinced everyone I was having some kind of breakdown, that he just wanted to take care of me. My laugh was hollow. He did that. Took care of me until there was almost nothing left. The note, Frank said quietly. I nodded. His words, what he'd tell me, over and over, that I was worthless, not even worth the food I ate. My fingers touched the small scar on my lip. I think he finally got tired of me, or found someone new. I don't really remember the last night, just fragments. Frank's face had gone hard, the lines deeper, his eyes cold. Your chest still out there? I don't know, I admitted. I don't even know where in here is, really. How I got from Washington State to Montana. How many days I've lost. Washington, Frank repeated. Seattle, Spokane, I corrected. Small town outside Spokane. Frank nodded, processing this. Long way from here. Far enough, I hope. For the silence stretched between us, filled with the implications of what I'd shared. I'd run before, and been found. What made this time different? He won, to find you here, Frank said, as if reading my thoughts. And if he does. He didn't finish the sentence, but the steel in his voice left little doubt about his meaning. I cannot stay forever, I said, though the thought of leaving the safety of the cabin filled me with dread. No, Frank agreed. But you not leaving until you ready, until you strong enough. He stood, moving to the window to check the storm outside. Get some rest, Morning comes early. As I headed to my room, Caroline S. room, I paused in the doorway. Frank? He turned from the window. Thank you for listening. For not... I struggled to find the words. For not what? For not telling me I should have left sooner, or fought back harder, or been smarter. The things I told myself 1,000 times. Frank's expression softened slightly. People who say that have never been hunted. The simple truth of his words stayed with me as I fell. January melted into February, bringing longer days but deeper cold. The routine of life in Frank A.'s cabin became a comfort. Meals shared in companionable silence, evenings by the fire, the simple chores that kept the place running. My bruises faded completely, though the deeper aches remained, the legacy of years of abuse that had left invisible fractures throughout my body. Frank taught me to chop wood, to build a fire that would last through the night, to check the generator when the power flickered. I taught him to make bread from scratch, to darn the holes in his socks instead of just throwing them away, to brew tea properly instead of just dunking a bag in lukewarm water. We ventured into town every week or so for supplies. I still wore Caroline S. clothes, still used the name Sarah when introduced to people, still kept my eyes down when Deputy Wilson was around. But I no longer hid in the truck. Small steps. One clear morning in late February, Frank announced he needed to go to Helena, the nearest real city, for his VA appointment. It is a 3-hour drive, he said over breakfast. Might need to stay overnight if the roads are bad coming back. You okay with that? The thought of being alone in the cabin overnight sent a flutter of panic through me. But I nodded, pushing the fear down. I'll be fine. Frank studied me for a moment, then nodded back. There's a shotgun in the closet by the front door. You know how to use one? I shook my head. I'll show you before I leave, he said, matter of fact, just in case. After breakfast, Frank took the shotgun down from its place above the closet door. It was old, but well maintained, like everything in the cabin. He showed me how to load it, how to aim, how to brace it against my shoulder to absorb the recoil. Probably one to need it, he said as he put it back. But better to know. He left mid-morning, the truck AES tires crunching on the frozen gravel of the driveway. I stood in the doorway until the sound faded, then closed and locked the door, suddenly aware of every creak and groan of the cabin settling around me. To keep busy, I decided to make a proper meal for when Frank returned, a thank you for everything he'd done. I found chicken in the freezer, root vegetables in the cold storage under the porch. I would make a pot pie, I decided. Comfort food for a cold winter night. As I worked in the kitchen, rolling out dough for the crust, I realized I was humming. An old habit I'd lost somewhere along the way. The simple domestic act of cooking, of creating something with my hands, brought a peace I hadn't felt in years. Outside, the afternoon light began to fade, the winter sun setting early behind the mountains. I lit the lamps, built up the fire in the wood stove, and put the pie in the oven. The cabin filled with warmth and the rich smell of cooking food. I was washing the dishes when I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. Frank, back early. I dried my hands, smiling at the thought of his surprise at finding dinner ready. But when I looked out the window, the vehicle in the driveway was an T. Frank S. green truck. It was a police cruiser, its light bar dark but unmistakable in the fading light. My heart stuttered in my chest. I backed away from the window, instinctively moving toward the shotgun in the closet. But before I could reach it, a knock came at the door. Firm, official. Frank Miller? A voice called. Sheriff E.S. Department. Need to talk to you. Deputy Wilson. I recognized his voice from our encounters in town. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, unsure what to do. If I didn't answer, would he leave? Or would he become suspicious, maybe force his way in? Another knock, harder this time. Miller, your truck is not here but there as lights on. Anyone home? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then I moved to the door, opening it just enough to see out but keeping the chain on. Deputy Wilson, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Frank S. not here. VA appointment in Helena. Wilson I.'s face showed surprise, then something else, a calculation that made my skin crawl. Sarah, right. Frank E.'s niece. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Mind if I come in for a minute? Got some questions about a disturbance reported near here. Every instinct screamed danger, but I couldn't think of a reason to refuse that wouldn't raise suspicion. Reluctantly, I closed the door, removed the chain, and opened it again. Wilson stepped inside, his bulk seeming to fill the small entryway. He smelled of cigarettes and something sharper, whiskey maybe. His eyes scanned the cabin, taking in details. What kind of disturbance? I asked, keeping my distance. Wilson moved further into the living room, uninvited. Someone reported hearing a woman screaming out this way last night. Thought I'd check it out. A lie. I'd had no nightmares last night, no reason to scream. And the nearest neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, according to Frank, lived far enough away that she wouldn't have heard even if I had. Done no disturbance here, I said, moving toward the kitchen, putting the counter between us. Just me, making dinner. Wilson sniffed the air. Smells good. Waiting for your uncle to get back. I nodded, watching as he wandered around the living room, picking up Frank E.'s book from the side table, setting it down again. His casualness felt practiced, predatory. Funny thing, Wilson said, turning to face me. Been asking around about Frank E.'s family. Nobody seems to remember him having a sister or a niece from Idaho. Ice spread through my veins. His sister, my mother, moved away years ago. They weren't close. Wilson S. smile didn't reach his eyes. That right? Because I called the Sheriff S. office up in Kerr D. Aline. No report of any car accident involving a Sarah Miller in the last 3 months. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. The oven timer dinged, making me jump. My pie, I said weakly, turning to the oven, more for escape than necessity. Wilson moved closer, leaning against the counter. Too close. Want to know what I think? He asked, his voice dropping lower. I think you're not Frank S. niece at all. I think you were running from something. Or someone. I kept my back to him, hands shaking as I pulled the golden brown pie from the oven and set it on the stovetop. I don't know what you are talking about. See, there was a bulletin came through a while back, Wilson continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Woman missing from Washington State. Husband real worried about her. Said she wasn't right in the head. Might be a danger to herself. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. He was fishing, I told myself. He couldn't know. If he knew for certain, he wouldn't be playing this game. That has nothing to do with me, I managed, finally turning to face him. Wilson was closer than I expected, blocking my path back to the living room. Maybe not, but it's my job to check these things out. He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. Pretty thing like you, all alone out here with old one-armed Frank. Doesn't it seem right? I flinched away from his touch. Frank will be back soon. Wilson chuckled. No, he won a TVA appointments in Helena take all day. He wanted to be back till morning, if then. His eyes hardened. Plenty of time for us to get to know each other better. The threat was unmistakable. I glanced toward the front door, calculating my chances of reaching it before he could stop me. Slim to none. I need to check something in the bedroom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Excuse me. Wilson S. hand shot out, grabbing my wrist hard enough to bruise. Don't think so, darlingove. We're just getting started here. A memory flashed. Another hand, another grip. Another time I'd been trapped. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't E.T. alone in the world with nowhere to turn. Let go of me, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Wilson's grip tightened. Or what? I'll scream. Nobody to hear you out here. I'll hear her. Frank S. voice from the doorway was cold as the winter night outside. Wilson spun, releasing my wrist in surprise. Frank stood just inside the front door, his face a mask of controlled fury. I hadn't heard the truck return, hadn't heard him enter. But there he was, solid and real, like an answer to a prayer I hadn't dared to make. "This is official police business, Miller," Wilson said, recovering quickly. "Nothing for you to worry about. On my property, in my house, with your hands on my guest." Frank S.'s voice was dangerously quiet. "Looks like something to worry about to me." Wilson S.'s hand moved to rest on his holstered gun. "I was just asking some questions about your niece here. And now you, relieving," Frank said, stepping aside to clear the path to the door. For a tense moment, I thought Wilson might draw his weapon. His face flushed red, a vein pulsing at his temple. But something in Frankie's steady gaze must have given him pause. "This isn't Tova," Wilson said, moving toward the door. "Sooner or later, your little secret S gonna come out. Get off my property," Frank replied evenly. "Don T come back without a warrant. And Sheriff Hank." Wilson paused at the door, looking back at me with a smile that chilled my blood. "See you around, Sarah." The way he said the name made it clear he didn't believe it for a second. After he left, Frank closed and locked the door, then moved to the window to watch until the Cruiser S taillights disappeared down the driveway. "Are you hurt?" he asked, turning to me. I shook my head, though my wrist throbbed where Wilson had grabbed it. "I thought you were staying in Helena." Weather report changed. Decided to risk the drive back. Frank S.'s eyes were still hard, his jaw tight with anger. "Good thing." "He knows," I said, the reality sinking in. "Or about me. Not everything, but enough." Frank moved to the kitchen, opening a cabinet and pulling out a bottle of whiskey I hadn't seen before. He poured 2 fingers into a glass and handed it to me. "Drink this, then we'll talk." The whiskey burned going down, but the warmth that spread through me afterward steadied my nerves. Frank poured himself a smaller amount, sipping it slowly as he leaned against the counter. "Wilson S. been trying to find something on me for years," he said after a while. "Old grudge from high school. Me shipping out to the army while he stayed here. Him wanting Caroline." Frank S.'s mouth twisted. Now he thinks he found it. He mentioned a bulletin about a woman missing from Washington. Frank nodded, unsurprised. "Figured it might be something like that. Question is, what do you want to do about it?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want? For so long, my wants had been irrelevant, dangerous even to acknowledge. "I cannot go back," I said finally. "He will kill me this time." "Then you don't go back," Frank said simply. "But Wilson is a problem we can handle." Frank set down his glass. "But first, is that pie I smell?" The sudden shift in topic made me laugh despite everything, a short, surprised sound that felt foreign in my throat. "Yes, chicken pot pie. I made it for when you got back." Frank's expression softened slightly. "Been a long time since anyone cooked for me." He moved to get plates from the cabinet. "Let S eat. Everything looks better after a good meal." We ate at the kitchen table, the pie still warm and fragrant between us. Neither of us mentioned Wilson or the threat he represented. Instead, Frank told me about his trip to Helena, the VA doctor who never listened, the traffic that had convinced him to turn back early. Normal conversation, as if we were normal people having a normal evening. The absurdity of it made me want to laugh again, or maybe cry. After dinner, as I washed dishes and Frank dried them, he finally returned to the problem at hand. "There's a woman I know in Missoula," he said, carefully wiping a plate. "Runs a shelter for women in trouble. Good people. They could help you get somewhere safe. New ID, new start." The offer hung in the air between us, a solution, practical and clean. Exactly what I needed. So why did the thought of leaving fill me with such dread? "Is that what you want?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the soapy water in the sink. "For me to go?" Frank was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was rough with something I couldn't name. What I want doesn't matter, he said. What matters is keeping you safe. I turned to face him, really looking at him for perhaps the first time. The lines in his face that spoke of pain and loss, the steadiness in his blue eyes, the grey in his beard. A broken man who had found a purpose in protecting me. A man who had given me back something I thought was lost forever. My dignity, my sense of worth. What if I am safe here? I asked softly. Frank shook his head. Wilson won. To let this go. He'll keep digging until he finds something he can use. Then we give him something else to focus on, I said, the beginnings of an idea forming. Something that makes him look elsewhere. Frank raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to continue. If he thinks I have left, I explained, gone to another state, he will have no reason to keep watching your cabin, no reason to connect you to whatever bulletin he saw. And how do we make him think that? So I considered this, thinking about the small town and how quickly information traveled through it. We need someone he'll believe, someone whose word he wouldn't question. Frank's expression changed as understanding dawned. Mary at the store. I nodded. We tell her I got a call from my mother. Emergency back in Idaho. Had to leave right away. And Mary tells the whole town by noon, Frank finished, including Wilson. Exactly. If Frank studied me, his head tilted slightly. That buys us time, but eventually you will need to leave for real, build a new life somewhere. I know, I said, but not yet. Not until I am stronger. Not until I am ready. The admission seemed to satisfy him. He nodded once, decisive. Tomorrow we go to town. You say your goodbyes to Mary. I'll spread the word that I am driving you to the bus station in Helena. And then we wait. See if Wilson bites. That night, after Frank had gone to bed, I stood by the window in the living room, looking out at the moonlit snow. The fear Wilson had stirred was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But alongside it was something else. Resolve. Determination. For years I had been running, hiding, surviving. But now, for the first time, I was fighting back. Planning. Taking control of my own safety. It wasn't freedom, not yet. But it was a step toward it. A step toward healing. Outside, an owl called into the night, its voice clear and confident in the darkness. I wrapped Caroline's sweater tighter around myself and whispered a promise to the quiet room. I am worth feeding. I am worth saving. I am worth fighting for. Words I hadn't believed for so long. Words I was finally beginning to feel might be true. Our plan worked better than we could have hoped. The next day, I put on a brave face and told Mary I'd received an urgent call from my mother. She'd fallen and broken her hip, needed me home right away. Mary's sympathy was immediate and overwhelming, complete with hugs and promises to pray for my mother as quick recovery. Such a shame you have to leave so suddenly, she said, patting my hand. We were just getting to know you. By the time we left the store, Mary was already on the phone, no doubt spreading the news to half the town. Frank and I exchanged a knowing look as we climbed back into his truck. Think she bought it? I asked. Frank nodded. Hook, line, and sinker. By dinner time, everyone in Pine Creek will know Sarah Miller has gone back to Idaho. We drove to the edge of town, then doubled back using a logging road Frank knew, arriving at the cabin from the opposite direction in case anyone was watching. For the next week I stayed inside, away from the windows, while Frank made occasional appearances in town to maintain the illusion that he was alone again. 7 days after our departure, Frank returned from the general store with news. Wilson asked about you, he said, hanging his coat by the door. Tried to make it casual, but I could tell he was fishing. What did you say? Told him you were settling back in with your mother, that you called to let me know you arrived safe. Frank's mouth curved in a rare half smile. He seemed disappointed. Relief washed through me. So he believes I'm gone. Seems that way. Frank sat heavily in his chair by the wood stove. But we still need to be careful. No trips to town for you. Not for a while. I nodded, accepting the continued confinement as necessary. The cabin had become a sanctuary anyway, a place where I felt safe, where I was slowly finding pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. February gave way to March, bringing warmer days and the first hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of earth that had been hidden for months. I started planning a garden, something small I could tend in the cleared area behind the cabin, hidden from the road. Frank taught me to fish in the small creek that gave the town its name, showed me which wild plants were edible, which mushrooms to avoid. Basic survival skills he'd learned in the military and honed during his years alone. "Knowledge is power," he said as we walked back to the cabin one day, a string of trout in his hand. "The more you know how to do for yourself, the less anyone can ever take from you again." I thought about that a lot in the quiet evenings that followed, about power and knowledge and self-sufficiency, about the difference between surviving and living, about what it meant to rebuild a life from the ground up. One morning in early April, as I was kneading dough for bread, Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway with an envelope in his hand. "This came for you," he said, holding it out. I froze, flour coating my hands. "For me? How is that possible?" Frank looked uncomfortable. "I may have made some inquiries, through some old army contacts, about your situation." I took the envelope with trembling fingers. It was addressed simply to Emma at Frank S. P.O. Box in Pine Creek. "What is this?" I asked, fear bubbling up despite myself. "Information," Frank said. "About him, your husband, ex-husband, whatever he is to you." My throat went dry. "Is he looking for me?" "No," Frank said firmly. "He's not looking for anyone anymore." I sank into a kitchen chair, the envelope clutched in my flour-dusted hands. "What does that mean?" Frank sat across from me, his expression grave. "He's in jail. Arrested 3 months ago for assault on his new girlfriend. She nearly died, but she lived long enough to press charges." The world seemed to tilt beneath me. 3 months ago, around the time I'd been left on Frank S.'s porch with that hateful note. "He left me here," I whispered. "Dumped me and went back to find someone new." Frank nodded. "Looks that way. According to my contact, he told police he hadn't seen you in months, that you'd run off. He never filed a missing person report." A strange laugh escaped me, half sob, half genuine mirth. So Wilson S. Bulletin was about someone else entirely. "Seems like it, or he was lying to get a reaction from you." Frank tapped the envelope. "And the rest of the details are in there, if you want them." I stared at the envelope, this unexpected connection to my past life. Did I want to know? Would it help me heal, or only reopen wounds that were finally beginning to close? Not today, I decided, setting the envelope aside. Maybe someday, but not today. Frank nodded, understanding without needing explanation. Fair enough. That night, I dreamed of falling, a long, endless descent through darkness. But instead of hitting bottom, I landed softly, caught by unseen hands that lowered me gently to solid ground. I woke with tears on my face, but a strange lightness in my chest. A burden lifted that I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. He couldn't hurt me anymore, couldn't find me, couldn't drag me back into that life of fear and pain. I was free. The realization changed something fundamental inside me. I began to look forward instead of constantly glancing over my shoulder, began to make plans that extended beyond mere survival. I started with small things, clearing the garden plot, planting seeds Frank bought in town, fixing a loose step on the porch. Each task completed felt like a tiny victory, a reclaiming of agency I'd been denied for so long. Frank watched my transformation with quiet approval, offering help when needed, but mostly giving me space to find my own way. We settled into a rhythm, a partnership of sorts. I kept the cabin, cooked meals, mended clothes. He handled the heavy work, taught me the skills I needed, kept watch for any sign of trouble from town. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself. but it was a life, real and solid, and, increasingly, my own. One evening in late April, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, Frank broke our comfortable silence. "Got a letter today," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "From Lily." I turned to him, surprised. "Your daughter? What did she say?" Frank stared out at the mountains, his face unreadable. "She as having a baby, in August, wanted me to know." He paused, asked if I'd come visit, after the birth. Joy surged through me on his behalf. "Frank, that wonderful." He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Been thinking about it all day. Don't know if I should go." "Of course you should go," I said firmly. She is reaching out. "That S huge." "Been a long time," Frank said softly. "Said a lot of things we cannot take back." I understood his fear. The vulnerability of hope after years of resignation. The risk of rejection when you have finally made peace with loss. "Some wounds do heal," I told him, echoing his words from months ago, "if you give them the chance." Frank and Kaya's eyes met mine, startled by the reference. Then something in his face softened. "Maybe you are right." "I know I am right," I said with a confidence that surprised even me. "You need to go, meet your grandchild, start again." Frank nodded slowly. Seattle is a long way. I'd be gone at least a week. And there it was, the unspoken question between us. What would happen to me while he was gone? Would I stay? Would I be safe? "I'll be fine here," I assured him. "Wilson hasn't been around in months. Everyone thinks I'm long gone." Frank didn't look convinced. "Ask Donna Fati like the idea of leaving you alone that long." "I'm not the same person who woke up on your porch," I reminded him. "I am stronger now." He couldn't argue with that. He'd seen the change in me day by day, small steps adding up to a transformation neither of us had anticipated. "I'll think about it," he said finally. But I knew he would go. Knew it was right that he should go. The circle of his life had a chance to close, to heal in a way he'd never thought possible. I wouldn't let my presence, my fears, prevent that. 2 days later, I opened the envelope Frank had given me. Inside were newspaper clippings, court documents, police reports, the paper trail of my husband A's downfall. Seeing his name in print, seeing the clinical description of his crimes against another woman, brought a complex mix of emotions, vindication, grief, guilt that I hadn't somehow stopped him sooner. But most of all, it brought clarity. My past was exactly that, past. What lay ahead was still unwritten. That night, I showed Frank the contents of the envelope. "I've decided something," I told him. "When you go to Seattle in August, I mean going too. Not to stay with you," I added quickly, "but to start over. New city, new name, new life." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "You sure that's what you want?" "I can hide in these mountains forever," I said gently. "You've given me shelter when I needed it most, given me time to heal, to find my strength again. But now I need to build something of my own." The pain that flashed across his face was quickly masked, but I caught it. In his own gruff way, Frank had come to depend on my presence as much as I depended on his protection. "You've got months to change your mind," he said gruffly. I smiled. "I won tea, but I'll still be here until August. Plenty of time to teach you to make decent coffee before I go." The joke eased the tension, and Frank's mouth twitched in what had become a familiar, almost smile. "Deal," he said. Spring bloomed into summer, bringing long golden days and short, mild nights. The garden thrived under my care, producing more vegetables than Frank and I could eat. We canned the excess for winter, a gesture of faith in the future that wasn't lost on either of us. In June, Frank brought home a dog from the shelter in Helena, a 3-legged German shepherd with soulful eyes and a fierce protective streak. "Figured you could use the company," he said gruffly, as the dog leaned against my leg. "And the extra set of ears when I am not around." I named her Trinity, after the 3 legs she stood on, the 3 months ID spent healing at Frank S. cabin, and the third chance at life I'd been given. Trinity became my shadow, following me through the garden, accompanying me on increasingly longer walks in the surrounding woods, sleeping at the foot of my bed at night. Her watchful presence gave me a confidence I had not felt before, allowing me to venture further from the cabin's safety. July brought heat and thunderstorms that rattled the cabin windows. Frank and I spent evenings on the porch, watching lightning split the sky over distant mountains, Trinity alert at our feet. Those quiet moments, the comfortable silence between two people who had seen the worst of life and survived, became precious to me. A kind of peace I hadn't known was possible. As August approached, we began making preparations. Frank received another letter from Lily, confirming her due date, expressing cautious hope about his visit. I could see the mixture of joy and terror in his eyes as he read it, the fear of disappointment warring with the desperate need to reconnect with his only child. "What if she is just doing this out of obligation?" he asked one evening. "What if she still hates me?" "She doesn't hate you," I said with certainty. "She was hurt, angry. Those are not the same things." Frank looked unconvinced. "How can you be so sure?" "Because she is reaching out," I explained. "People who truly hate do not reach out. They just walk away." He considered this, rolling the thought over like a stone in his hand. "Maybe you were right." "I know I am right," I said, echoing our conversation from months ago. "And I know something else too." "What is that?" "I know that note around my neck was wrong," I said softly. "We're all worth feeding, worth saving, worth fighting for. Your daughter knows that about you, even if you don't quite believe it yet." Frank Ann's eyes met mine, startled by the raw honesty. Then he nodded once, accepting the truth of my words without need for further discussion. 2 weeks before our planned departure for Seattle, Frank came home from town with an unexpected guest, Sheriff Hank, looking uncomfortable in his official capacity, but determined nonetheless. My heart lurched at the sight of him, but Frank's calm demeanor steadied me. "Sheriff has some news," he said as they entered the cabin. "Thought you should hear it directly." Hank removed his hat, nodding a greeting to me. Well, I'm not sure what to call you, to be honest." Emma is fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Trinity pressed against my leg, sensing my tension. "Emma, then." Hank cleared his throat. "I came to let you know that Deputy Wilson won't be bothering you anymore. He's been removed from his position." I exchanged a glance with Frank. "What happened?" "Turns out Wilson's been running his own little side operation," Hank explained. "Taking money to look the other way on certain matters. Intimidating folks he didn't like." He looked embarrassed. "Should have seen it sooner, but, well, no excuses. When the evidence came to light, we had no choice but to let him go." "What evidence?" Frank asked, his voice carefully neutral. Hank shrugged. "Anonymous package, recordings, bank statements, pretty damning stuff." He turned back to me. "Point is, you don't need to hide anymore, not in Pine Creek anyway." The revelation left me speechless. Wilson, the man who had threatened me, who had made me fear being discovered, was gone, just like that. After Hank left, promising discretion about my presence, I turned to Frank. "Did you have something to do with Wilson's evidence appearing?" Frank's expression gave nothing away. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." He was silent for a long moment. "Let's just say I still have friends from my army days, people who owe me favors, people who know how to find things that need finding." I should have been shocked, perhaps even disturbed by the implication. Instead, I felt a profound gratitude. Frank had removed an obstacle to my freedom without violence, without confrontation, simply by exposing the truth. "Thank you," I said simply. Frank nodded once. The matter closed. With Wilson no longer a threat, our plans shifted slightly. I could move more freely now, no longer confined to the shadows. Frank suggested I might want to stay in Pine Creek, find a job in town, perhaps even teach again someday. The possibility was tempting, but something in me still yearned for a fresh start, a place without memories or ghosts. "I still want to go to Seattle," I told him, "at least for a while." Frank accepted this with the same quiet grace he'd shown throughout our time together. "Your choice, always was." The morning of our departure dawned clear and bright, the mountains sharp against a perfectly blue sky. We loaded the truck with our minimal luggage, Frank A.S. duffel bag, a small suitcase Frank had bought for me containing the few possessions I'd accumulated over the past months, and Trinity S. new bed and food bowls. Before leaving, I walked through the cabin one last time, touching the worn furniture, the books on the shelves, the quilt on my bed that had once been Caroline S. This place had saved me in more ways than I could count, had given me shelter when I was broken, space to heal, time to find my strength again. Frank stood in the doorway, watching me. "Ready?" I nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "Ready. B." The drive to Seattle took us through mountain passes still touched with summer green, along winding highways that followed river valleys, past small towns not unlike Pine Creek. Frank drove steadily, one hand on the wheel, his face set in concentration. Trinity sat between us on the bench seat, her head occasionally resting on my leg. We talked little during the journey, both lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. Frank S. reunion with his daughter. My uncertain future in a new city. The changes that awaited us both. As we neared Seattle, the landscape changed. More traffic, larger towns, eventually the sprawl of the city itself. Frank navigated with surprising confidence for someone who claimed to hate urban areas. "Lily lives in Ballard," he explained as we crossed Lake Washington. "Nice neighborhood. Safe." We had arranged to drop me at a small apartment I'd rented sight unseen. A month-to-month place that would give me time to find my feet without committing to anything permanent. Frank would continue on to Lily A.'s home, where a room awaited him and awkward but hopeful conversations would begin. When we pulled up outside my new building, neither of us moved immediately. The moment of separation, though planned and prepared for, suddenly felt overwhelming. "I can help you get your things inside," Frank offered. I shook my head. "I need to do this part myself." I turned to face him fully. "But before I go, I need to say something." Frank waited, his blue eyes steady on mine. "You saved my life," I said simply. "Not just by taking me in that morning, but by showing me I was worth saving, worth feeding." My voice broke slightly on the words. "I don't know how to thank you for that." Frank S.'s weathered face softened. "You already have," he said quietly. "You reminded me I was worth something too." The truth of it hung between us. How we had saved each other in different ways. How the broken woman left on his porch had helped heal something in him, just as he had helped heal her. "This isn't goodbye," I said firmly. "Just until next time." Frank nodded. "Trinity and I will check on you. Once I've sorted things with Lily." The dog's ears perked up at her name, her tail thumping against the seat. I buried my fingers in her fur, drawing comfort from her solid presence. "I'd like that," I said. With nothing left to say, I gathered my courage and opened the truck door. The Seattle air smelled of salt water and coffee, foreign yet somehow promising. I collected my suitcase from the back, then turned for one last look at Frank, the one-armed veteran who had become, against all odds, my protector, my teacher, my friend. "Thank you," I said again, the words entirely inadequate. Frank S. mouth quirked in that almost smile I'd come to recognize. "Be safe, Emma." "You too, Frank." I watched as he drove away, Trinity S. face pressed against the passenger window until the truck disappeared around a corner. Then I turned to face my new building, my new life, my new beginning. The note that had been pinned to my coat that winter morning had been wrong. So terribly wrong. I was worth feeding, worth sheltering, worth saving. And now, finally, I was ready to prove it. The coffee shop on Ballard Avenue became my anchor in those first uncertain months in Seattle. I started as a barista, The simple routine of brewing drinks and greeting customers, helping me ease back into a world I'd been absent from for so long. The owner, a kind woman named Elena, asked few questions about my past and offered steady hours and patient training. I found a therapist, a gentle woman with grey in her hair and wisdom in her eyes, who helped me navigate the landmines of trauma that still occasionally exploded in nightmares or unexpected panic attacks. Slowly, session by session, I rebuilt the foundation of my sense of self. Frank visited every few weeks, usually with Trinity, sometimes with news of Lily and the baby, a girl named Caroline, after her grandmother. The first time he brought a photo, I saw the pride in his eyes, the tentative joy of a man rediscovering family after years of solitude. "She has your eyes," I told him, studying the picture of the tiny infant in Lily S. arms. "Poor kid," Frank replied, but he couldn't hide his smile. By Christmas, I had saved enough for a better apartment, a small but sunny one-bedroom with windows that faced east, catching the morning light. Frank helped me move in, Trinity exploring each room with curious sniffs and wagging tail. "Place looks good," he said, setting down the last box. "Feels like you." I looked around at the modest furnishings, the books already lining newly installed shelves, the potted plants thriving on the windowsills. It wasn't much, but it was mine, safe, secure. "It does," I agreed. "It feels like home." Later that evening, as we sat at my small kitchen table sharing a meal I'd cooked, Frank pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Got something for you," he said, sliding it across to me. "Merry Christmas." Inside was a deed to the cabin in Pine Creek, in my name. I looked up, stunned. "Frank, I can accept this. Already done," he said firmly. "Papers are filed. It's yours." "But where will you live?" I asked, still processing the magnitude of the gift. Frank's expression softened. "Lily asked me to stay, help with the baby. There was a small apartment over her garage." He paused. I said yes. Joy for him warred with confusion about the deed in my hands. "Then why give me the cabin?" "Because everyone needs a safe place," Frank said simply. "Somewhere to go when the world gets too loud. Somewhere that's just yours." He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering mine briefly. "That cabin saved us both once. Might as well keep it in the family." Family. The word settled in my chest, warm and unexpected. As winter turned to spring, I took evening classes at the community college, gradually rebuilding my teaching credentials. My therapist suggested volunteering as a step toward returning to the classroom, so I began spending Saturday mornings at a women's shelter, helping residents with resume writing and interview skills. It was there I met Marissa, 16 years old, 7 months pregnant, with bruises fading on her wrists and a hunted look I recognized all too well. She reminded me so much of myself that it hurt to look at her sometimes. But I made myself look, made myself sit with her, made myself listen. "Nobody believes me," she told me one rainy afternoon. "They think I'm now making it up, or that I deserved it." "I believe you," I said, the words carrying the weight of my own history. "And you didn't deserve any of it." Gradually, visit by visit, I told her my story, not all at once, but in pieces she could absorb, about waking on a stranger's porch with a cruel note pinned to my coat, about a one-armed veteran who taught me to fish and chop wood and believe in my own worth again, about the long journey from there to here. "You got out," she said one day, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "For real?" "Yes," I agreed. "And you will too." See, when her baby came, a boy with his mother's dark eyes and determination, I was there, holding her hand through the pain, witnessing her fierce courage as she brought new life into the world. "I am scared," she whispered after, her son sleeping in her arms. "What if I cannot protect him?" "You want to be alone," I promised, and she wasn't a tea. The shelter staff, the volunteers, me. We created a network around her, a safety net woven from shared experience and unwavering support. In June, I received a letter from Mary at the general store in Pine Creek. News traveled even to the remotest corners, it seemed. She'd heard I was in Seattle, heard about Franca's reconciliation with his daughter, heard I might be teaching again soon. "Pine Creek misses you," she wrote in her neat, slanting script. "The cabin looks lonely without smoke from the chimney." I read the letter twice, then made a decision. When summer break came, I drove back to Montana, Trinity beside me in the passenger seat of the used car I.D. bought with my teaching assistant S. salary. The cabin was exactly as we D. left it, though somewhat dusty from disuse. I opened windows to let in the mountain air, swept floors, made up the bed with fresh linens I.D. brought from Seattle. Trinity explored the familiar territory, barking joyfully as she raced around the clearing. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink, just as it had a year ago when Frank had first told me about Lily A's letter. The air smelled of pine and wild herbs. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the gathering dusk. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the fear, the slow rebuilding of a life I'd thought was destroyed beyond repair. I thought about Frank, who had opened his door to a stranger when he had every reason to turn away. About Marissa and her baby taking their first tentative steps toward freedom and safety. About the note that had been pinned to my coat that winter morning. Not even worth feeding. A lie. Such a profound lie. We are all worth feeding, worth sheltering, worth saving. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us of that truth when we've forgotten. As darkness fell over the mountains, I made a silent promise to the cabin, to Frank, to myself. I would come back here every summer, would keep this place as a sanctuary, not just for me, but for others who might need it. A safe harbor in the storm of life. A place to heal. A place to remember what it means to be worthy. The porch steps creaked beneath me as I stood, Trinity at my heels. Inside, I lit a lamp against the gathering darkness, its warm glow spilling through the windows and into the night beyond. A beacon, a welcome, a statement of presence. I am here. I survived. I am home.